Good morning and welcome to the Caregiver Teleconnection. My name is Glenda Rogers. I'm going to be your facilitator for the session this morning. And we're going to be talking today with Esther Pipoly. She's going to be talking about caregiving at the end of life. And I think it's going to be a really interesting presentation. We've been visiting a little bit before we open the session. So let me introduce you to Esther, and then she will get started with her presentation. Got to have my glasses for this part. Esther Pipoly is founder and owner of LOLA, which stands for, yes, Loss of Life Advocates, excuse me. She grew up in San Antonio, Texas, and has a firsthand knowledge about losing a loved one, having lost her father and husband just 63 days apart in 2014. Esther knew that her lifelong career in insurance and her personal life experience were leading her to help others in the most difficult of times, death. Having been the executor for both her father and husband's estates, the lessons Esther learned should be passed along. She hopes to prevent for others the obstacles she was forced to face. In her free time, Esther enjoys spending time with her two grown children, traveling, and blogging. Esther, thank you so much for joining us today, and please go ahead with your presentation.
Thank you, Glenda. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak to this group. I think many of you have probably maybe heard me at different locations, or maybe you've been a guest with me on other previous recordings. So thank you for coming back and making time. As I always tell people, the most precious thing that we have in life is time. So thank you for spending this with me today. So this is a little bit about me, loss of life advocates. When people ask me, like, Esther, what is it? People get kind of stuck on the loss part, right? So I've kind of transitioned over to we're life advocates. We're there to help you during a life transition, whether it's stroke, heart attack, a dementia diagnosis, sometimes it's even Lou Gehrig's, or maybe there's a child that's not doing well. And we also look at loss as many different things. It could be loss of a job, loss of a child going off to college. There's a lot of things that we work with families during and through life transitions. But most importantly, the takeaway is that Lola is my mom. And she was my first loss that I had in 1999, and probably one of the biggest because I had not really, up until that point in my life, I'd lost grandparents, I'd lost uncles and aunts, but I'd never really lost a true hero. And so in 2014, she died in 1999. 2014, I lost my dad and my husband 63 days apart. And I have to recognize the fact that we've gone through a pandemic. So many people lost loved ones closer than that. There were definitely more tragic stories out there. But for me, when I lost my dad and my husband, both my heroes, 63 days apart, I was at a complete loss of what to do. My dad, a lot of this presentation is based off of him because he was Mr. Prepared. He was an economics professor at Alamo Community College District here in San Antonio. He was the president of AARP for the state of Texas. So he was an advocate himself. My husband was a trial lawyer, and I always tell people he was a hot mess. And so with that, and keep in mind that Lola does a lot of things. So we help business owners, we work with employers, we work with families, caregivers, trying just to navigate. And sometimes it's just triaging. People call in and say, I just don't know where to start or what to do. And so that's what we do. And today is all about you and the caregiver. And I'm just going to share some stories with you that I think that maybe will resonate with you and let you know a little bit about how we help families. So I'd like to start, which, by the way, we were just talking this morning. It was supposed to rain first thing. I thought, man, it's going to rain today. Ooh. And it hasn't come yet, so it'll probably start right after lunch. But I love this picture because this kind of depicts what we do. We kind of hold the umbrella for people we care about and we love, even people that we meet for the first time that we automatically just take under our wings and we want to help them. So I'd like to start off with a case study that came to us probably about maybe a year ago. We had a hospice company that called me at 8 o'clock at night on a Wednesday. And they said, we've got this gentleman in Floresville, Texas, that his wife passed away, and his brother-in-law has been dropped on his doorstep. And I was like, okay, hold on, stop. Hospice company's calling me. Why are you calling me about this guy in Floresville? And they're like, well, we can't help him. The brother-in-law who is calling around is looking for help. He's desperate. His brother has dementia. He's in his early 70s. His wife was the caregiver. She was the person going to all the groups and, getting all the information and the education. And she had her caregiver support group. And unfortunately, there was a knock on the door to this brother-in-law's apartment in near Randolph Air Force Base here in San Antonio. And he opens the door on a Monday, and it's the Floresville Police Department with his brother. And they said, Excuse me, are you so-and-so?" And he said, "Yes, I am." He said, "Well, I'm sad to inform you that your sister-in-law passed away. And this is your brother, right?" "Yes." "Well, you're next of kin, so we need to leave him with you." So this brother-in-law, not married, never had children,
Mm.
single, with his career, all of a sudden is like a caregiver. And he instantly went into a tailspin of, what do I do? What do I do with this? So he started calling around, and somebody got him to a hospice company, which was one of our partners that we work with. And that's how he came to us, because he was literally locking his brother in his apartment and going to work. He just didn't know what to do. He didn't know where the resources were. He didn't know who to reach out to. And so we ended up helping him find a private care home. We had him take his brother to a private care home. They were able to get him in. The brother had at least enough in savings to start working with trying to take care of his brother and figure out what the care plan was going to be. He just got dumped on. And so he's talking to us, and we're trying to get him to many caregivers, support people. And he says, "Esther, I can't take care of my brother." So he ended up going through this process. We got his brother into a home. We had lawyers go meet with his brother. He had enough capacity to sign over papers. So what you don't know is that the sister-in-law, the wife of this gentleman, had been deceased for a week.
Oh
She'd
my goodness.
suffered a massive heart attack. She was in her kitchen, and because her husband had that dementia diagnosis, he was thinking that was asleep, and he didn't know who to call. He didn't know what to do. And so the sad thing about that was that it was the caregiver support group that started really thinking about, where is this person? She hasn't shown up. She isn't returning phone calls. Well, thank God for them, because those are the people that actually enlisted the help from the police department to show up to see that this was a really tragic situation. So I start with this case study because for all of us that are on this call, if you're a caregiver, this what we do at Lola is not just for the people that you're caring for, your loved one. It is for you, because we want you to know that if you're not prepared and you do not have a plan, who do you turn to? Like, who would this person, if you didn't have a plan for yourself, turn to for help? Is there a plan in place? And do you feel your family would know what to do if you're caring for somebody with a dementia diagnosis and you are their person? So that is today's question, and that's kind of where we start. And while it is a tragic story, there was a happy ending in the fact that the brother was able to get to resources within a short amount of time and help his brother. And his brother is living comfortably in a private care home, personal care home in San Antonio. But the reality is, most caregivers think that their family will know what to do. Their family will know who to call. Their family will know to call the CPA, a lawyer, a financial advisor who will protect them and their loved one, or a social worker, a chaplain, or a case manager. In this case, even your well-meant person. They're thinking, I'm going to just call them, or somebody's going to know to call them, and they're going to know where to go and what to do. The reality is that those people don't really know. The truth is, the family's affairs are probably in multiple places. You're probably the only person that knows where things are. The family becomes extremely vulnerable to outside resources if they're not vetted, if they don't have somebody that can go to them to find trusted resources. Friends and families will go into self-preservation mode, meaning that things start to walk off. People get access to bank accounts and financial information that should not have access to those things. And theft happens. The things that are important to you walk out the door. So let's review a case scenario. A husband's in the hospital. He's been the bill payer and holder of all financial information. His family and spouse go into a spend. Where is everything? Are final documents and affairs in order in place? Do we know his final wishes? Well, actually, this is a friend of mine, Debbie. She is a nurse here in San Antonio. She's actually a professor at the UT Health Science Center School of Nursing. And she actually teaches nurses and doctors how to walk a family through end of life, palliative care, hospice. So Debbie and I sit on a board together, the Hospice Palliative Nurse Association, and she is very seasoned. She is very well respected. But when her father actually, and I'll go back to, let's see if I have it. Nope, I didn't put it in here. There's a picture of her dad actually with her at an event. He had a sudden fall over a Christmas holiday, and that broken hip all of a sudden started his story of going into that final transition. Debbie calls me at 9 o'clock at night and says, "Esther, I'm so sorry to call you so late, but I don't know what I don't know. I'm a nurse. I'm a caregiver. I'm trying to figure out what to do. I can't separate my nursing side of me from my daughter's side of me. Can you help me? So we were able to talk with Debbie and get her and her dad set up. And what she realized was what her dad told her was, you know what, the inevitable is going to happen. We haven't talked about this. I know you're a nurse. I know you want to do everything to keep me safe and well and comfortable, but let's start planning the story of my transition. So looking for the right facility to ease the transition it will allow a family to be present. And that's something that's really important. Right now, I think we have VITAS out there that when a loved one is going to transition, that they can actually go into their inpatient unit, which is a beautiful unit if you've never seen it. Somebody does not have to pass away at home if they don't want to. And then acknowledging that your loved one's final wishes are what they want. If they're able to tell you what they want, make sure that you have those written down in case something happens to you. Make sure you're having these conversations. But even for Debbie, who is a nurse, a professional, a professor, sits on a lot of boards, she is nationally known in outside of our community, but also within our community. When it came time to have to try to navigate this portion of her life with her dad, she reached out to us and said, "Hey, how do I do this? What do I do?" And all I told her was, you be the daughter and we'll work on everything else for you to make sure that your dad is comfortable. And if you look here, I do want to show you on the left-hand picture, you see a dog. So
Mm.
her dad actually did not have any of his legal documents finalized. So we went in with a lawyer and we were able to do the documents bedside. And all he wanted was a beer, which is right here. So he had his Corona and he wanted his family dog to be with him, with his children and his grandchildren when he transitioned. He was still able to tell her what he wanted. And Debbie was able to make that happen because I was taking care of all the other stuff. She didn't have to worry about witnesses. She didn't have to worry about anything else. So that is Debbie. And knowing where everything is helps. Knowing where your personal information is, your financial information, your life infrastructure. Who knows what is everything about you? And your final wishes. And we're going to dive in a little on these because when people ask me, Esther, where do I even start with this? We like to say, look, we have a playbook that you can have access to. We sell them. We have downloadable versions, paper versions. But if just these four things you take away from us today, take your notes because these are some simple ways that you can, make sure that you're gathering things, putting them in one location, and then having those conversations. So let's break this down. Your personal information. What does that look like? Everything that goes on a death certificate, your first name, your last name, your mother's maiden name. And people will say, well, my husband knows that about me. But if your husband has a dementia diagnosis, does he know that about you? And do your kids know that about you? Well, yes, my children know that about me, Esther. I'm like, well, what happens if your daughter dies and it's your son-in-law that's having to make those arrangements for you? Would he know what your mother's maiden name is? So just those details, write them down. Make sure you have them written in a place where in the event something happens to you, it can be sent to the funeral home. It cuts the time in half. Are you in the military? Where are you in the military? The DD 214, I call this your passport to being buried with military honors. Many people will say, pardon me, my dad was in the military. He's going to be buried. Everything's taken care of. And I'm like, well, no, you still have to help, take care of the funeral side of things, whether it's cremation or burial services. The actual burial and internment is taken care of by the military. But if you don't have a copy of that DD 214, which is the discharge paperwork, the funeral home can't do anything for you. So I do have families when we're meeting with them, they say, yes, we have it. Somebody passes away and they can't find it.
Mm.
We tend to hide things from ourselves. It's kind of funny because my dad had 6 DD 214s and when he passed away, we couldn't find him. So he is buried at San Jose Cemetery with his family. My husband is buried at Fort Sam Houston. So the DD 214 is with Porter Loring in San Antonio, and they're taking care of my final wishes when and if the time comes. And I will be buried with my husband. All the items that go on a death certificate, again, that maiden name, your place of birth, your address, who's the next of kin, and just know that the death certificates, nothing can happen until you receive the death certificate. If your loved one passes away on hospice, just know that that hospice medical director has to sign the death certificate. Then it's handed over to the state. It goes up for their certification and comes back down. That process during the pandemic took up to 6 weeks, almost longer. Now it takes about 2 weeks to get those back. So many people will say, Esther, my mom just died. I need to sell the house, get the house liquidated. They go into fire mode. They go into like rapid fire. And I'm like, you cannot do anything until you have the death certificate. Don't even go to the bank. Don't let anybody know anything until you have a death certificate in your hand. And then also you're talking with a lawyer to make sure that you're doing things properly, whether it's going through probate or you have to do an affidavit of heirship or a small estate certification. So there are processes that really begin with that death certificate. So just remember, I always tell people, just pump the brakes, be in the period of time that you are in grief, go through the process, lean on your professionals to guide you. And when you get the death certificate, that's when you can start doing death certificate distribution to creditors and making those other decisions. Who is your inner circle that you can trust and turn to? Super important. I always tell the story of my family. My mother's sisters never got along with my mother. And so we always kind of laugh and say, they always show up when somebody's in the hospital. And I'm like, if they show up in that nice little nightgown that they give you at the hospital and you've got no makeup on, your hair's not done, and you've got wires coming out all over you, do you really want those people to show up? No, you want somebody that can block and tackle those people and say, thank you for coming. But no, she does not need to see anybody because you're here to rest, which is funny because I know that in my culture, I'm Hispanic. Everybody wants to come to the hospital and they want to see you and they want to talk to you. But the truth is the hospital is where you need to rest. So having an inner circle of people that you can trust and that will, if you have social media, shut that down to make sure nobody is posting on your wall that there's something wrong with you or that you're sick or we hope they feel better. I always tell my dad used to say, don't be the mouth of the South. Confidentiality is king when there is a loved one going through any type of transition. So your financial information, how do you pay your bills? And this is for you, again, going back to the caregiver. And I'm going to take a little sip of water. Pardon me. How do you pay your monthly bills? What is your income stream? How do things come in? How do bills get paid out? Who are your financial partners? Do you have people that are your certified financial advisors? Do you have wealth managers that are managing IRAs? How is that set up that if something were to happen to you, that would be taken care of and the money used for your spouse if they have that diagnosis of dementia? Who has access to your finances? This is where a lot of parents get stuck because they're thinking, well, I don't want my kids to know where everything's at. And then they're going to, be in my bank account. They're going to take my money. It's just a matter of giving them enough information to be able to access in case something happens to you. So I always tell caregivers, okay, you go in for a very basic in and outpatient procedure and you don't come out. Doesn't mean you're not going to come out. It just means that something might happen to where you're there for a longer period of time than you thought. So imagine who is going to step in and be able to access your accounts to pay your bills to make sure things don't get missed. This is very important, but also your financial partners, making sure they know your children, they know who has access to the information, because if something does happen to you, you need to make sure that those accounts have beneficiaries and that they're all set up correctly. Let's look at a case study here. What happens if something happens to you and the beneficiary is your husband and he has a dementia diagnosis? So now you've got a situation where something happens to you, he can't sign because he's not been given the authority to sign. Who are the backup beneficiaries to manage those accounts for him? It can become very costly with an attorney fast. So your life infrastructure, what exactly is this? Associations and memberships, passwords, military information, insurance, pensions, and benefits. Associations and memberships, I'm a member of a lot of different organizations, and my husband has been deceased 10 years now. I still get things in the mail for him for his memberships. They're almost impossible to cancel. And most people will tell me, Esther, the hardest one is actually a gym membership. They won't even take a death certificate. So just knowing where those memberships are, sometimes I'll tell kids, you know what, if you're trying to access your parents' information to find out things, you can run a credit report on them to see if what accounts are there. Sometimes you can, ask around and look at the mail or go through a bank account just to see online what things are coming out and what things are being paid automatically. Passwords are funny because we live in a time where, you have a password to everything. And if you're like me, I forget my passwords on a daily basis. So, putting them somewhere where somebody has access to them. I did have one client that was very clever. She had her recipe can, and behind her P for pies, and her recipe can were her passwords. And she would just update them all the time. And she told her kids, there's nothing that you need to worry about. Everything you need to know is in my recipe can. I thought that was pretty interesting. Military information, again, going back to that DD 214, where is it located? And making sure that your next of kin or your family know where to locate that. And then insurance information, if you're on Medicare, if there's Medicaid, if there's any type of Social Security, making sure that you've got that listed somewhere. In the event something does happen to you, your family needs to know what those insurance policies are for you, as well as for your loved one that you're caregiving for. And then pensions and benefits, how things are paid and knowing what those mean. So if you're a veteran, sometimes there are pensions that you're receiving that your spouse may not be eligible for after you pass away. So really checking in with those veteran service officers to know ahead of time what that looks like for your spouse if something happens to you. And your benefits, knowing where those benefits are. If you have teachers that are retired, they have that TRS benefit. How was that retirement fund set up? Was it that you got that full payment for the remainder of your life, or was it that maybe after you passed away, your spouse got the remainder of the payment until his or her natural life was over? So think of those things that you need to have written down so your kids know, because they get so lost really quickly with what's coming in, what's going out. And then, of course, I don't want to get too far in the weeds, but really understanding that sometimes people don't want to think about Medicaid as an option, but being able to have a strategy in place for that, because Medicaid can be a great benefit, but knowing how to set your estate up and your accounts up so that your loved one can get that 24-hour care, whether it's in home or in a facility, is really important. So benefits and knowing where those strategies are real important to be able to talk with your family through that. Your final wishes, you think you have everything prepaid for a funeral, but what's in the contract? We have a lot of people that come to us and say, yes, I have a prepaid funeral. And when I ask, well, where's the paperwork? They're like, well, I don't know, but you can call this funeral home and they might have it. And if you don't have all the information, the funeral home can't find your funeral contract sometimes, or maybe your funeral home doesn't cover, somebody passing away out of state and getting those loved ones' remains back to where the funeral home is located. So knowing what the fine print says, and my favorite is when people say, I've got it, everything's prepaid, and I ask them where their funeral and they're going to be buried. They're like, New Jersey. And I'm like, you're in San Antonio, right? I'm not quite sure you'll make it back to New Jersey. But does the funeral contract pay for that? Have you read the fine print? Have you discussed your wishes with your family? More importantly, if you have a blended family, today in our age, we have a lot of families that are his, mine, and ours. My family was just that. Having those discussions with your adult children to make sure that they know what your wishes are and that your spouse is going to make that decision for you, or your oldest child is going to make a decision for you when that happens, will help tremendously when there's a blended family and everybody's fighting at the end. Your final wishes are more than just your legal documents, although those are very important. Knowing where those documents are very important at the end of life. A lot of people will say, I know my mom had a will, we just don't know where it's at. And then if they try to find the attorney, more than likely the attorney has already either passed away or closed their business. Hard to locate it. And if you try to go to, probate court without a will, it can be very expensive. So when people ask me, Esther, your services, how do you help people? I'm like, if you don't have your legal documents in place and you own property and there's a lot of things going on, those attorneys are going to start at $4,000. So if I can help you at a minimal cost, triage, and my team can help you get set up, it's going to save your family a lot of money down the road, because the lawyers are going to be the ones that actually have to charge you those hourly fees to take care of your family after you're no longer here to answer questions. And are your documents updated, and have you reviewed them? Having an attorney review them once every 2 to 3 years is really important. And as you get older, it becomes more important because relationships change. And so maybe you thought that your oldest child who's an attorney would be the perfect person to be your executor. And now they're really so busy, they're not going to be that person. So you really need to take a look at who do you have left in charge of making decisions for you, whether it's a medical power of attorney or for a durable power of attorney who's making those financial decisions for you. And even, afterwards, when you're having to close down an estate, having the right person in the right spot is going to be really important. I always kind of compare it to a school bus. You got to have a good driver with all the people on the bus to coordinate them to make sure that they're all going the same direction. So let's face it, there's a lot you don't know. And maybe you're on this call today or you're thinking, hey, I've got a lot of this taken care of. Congratulations. I'm so happy for you. That makes my heart swell with happiness, because not everybody is in that spot. So we're almost at mid-year. How can we start finding ways to guide families through all of the planning and emotions? Nobody ever wants to talk about it. It's the elephant in the room, right? Are you able to have difficult conversations about the past few years behind you and think about the years ahead of you with your loved ones? I have a very good friend who's turning 90 this year, very active, but he actually fell. He had a significant fall out of the country about 4 or 5 months ago. And he told me, Esther, for the first time, as I was laying in bed, trying to get on a commercial flight to come back to San Antonio, was the first time I thought, I don't think I have all my affairs in order. I don't think I've had my conversations with my family. I don't think I've done anything. And he's a very successful businessman. He's had a very successful life. And so when people tell me I'm prepared, when things happen, they happen so fast. That's when you start really facing the idea of, I really don't know. And I really haven't had those conversations because nobody wants to talk about them. So let's discuss a few scenarios. And by the way, I love this little bunny and the elephant, like just kind of sitting next to each other, thinking out loud. So scenario number one, loved ones in the hospital, the case manager approaches and says they cannot go home. Where do we begin with this scenario? Did they have a plan for paying for a facility past approved days by Medicare? Who's overseeing the care plan? Who's overseeing the bills being paid? And who, and most importantly, is overseeing the home and the pets? I know I love my animals, so that's the first person I think about, like who's feeding my little dog? So in this case scenario, we were with here at North Central Baptist in San Antonio, called in to help with a family where the husband was very able. He was taking care of his wife who had actually been diagnosed with brain cancer, and she had suffered a fall, had gone into the emergency room, gone into ICU. The daughters all lived out of San Antonio, outside of San Antonio. And they were all standing around. They were exhausted because they'd been with their mom, taking turns trying to take care of her, and she was being discharged onto hospice. And the dad said, okay, well, who's going to cook for me? And who's going to iron my socks? And who's going to do this? Because she's been doing this my whole life. And we looked at him and said, okay, we need to sit down and have a heart to heart. You are going to be the caregiver now. You're going to have to figure out when she gets her medication. We need to get you a notepad. We need you to make sure that you're giving it to her at a certain time. And he looked at us and said, I've never had to do this for her. She's always been my person for me. So in that scenario, we knew that getting him set up and asking him, do you have a budget? Did you buy long-term care? Do you have enough money to pay for some support to come in and help you with your wife, to help bathe her, to help maybe move her around? The hospice company is going to do some of that, but they will not show up for you all the time until life is going to transition and death is imminent. So he was looking at this going, oh my gosh, who's going to be there? And the daughters were so exhausted. They said, we have to go home and take care of our kids, Dad. You're going to have to figure this out. And so we sat down and we quickly were able to bring in resources to help him with 24-hour care for the first weekend. So the girls could go home and then come back and they could start rotating about who was going to be helping mom and dad during the day. So overseeing the bills, he was like, she paid the bills. She took care of everything down to, cooking for me. These are things that you should start thinking about, not just like I said at the beginning of this presentation, for your loved one, but also for yourself. Because I asked him, what happens if something happens to you? And there was a complete stare, like, I can't even think about if something happened to me, Esther. I said, we have to start thinking one step further back. Scenario number two, loved one is diagnosed with dementia. His wife is trying to find a support system and plan, and as they have no children, the financial advisor will not address his wife. Where do we begin? Do they need guardianship paperwork created? What goes into this process? Who manages the bills, the assets in the event the caregiver falls ill? This is a really close one to me because it's actually somebody that is part of a caregiver group, and she called me and she was in a complete panic that she couldn't get a conversation or couldn't have a meeting with the financial advisor because her husband was the person that had the relationship with him. And every time the husband would talk to the financial advisor, he was clear. And so the financial advisor never really believed that he was going to have the conversation with the wife and didn't really acknowledge her in this financial relationship. And she was trying desperately to find access to the funds that they had saved for a rainy day, right? And the financial advisor saying, nope, not going to talk to you. My relationship's with your husband. So you're SOL. And she came to me and said, Esther, I don't even know where to start with this because my husband has dementia. He's not always clear. And I need that money so that I can go and get away for a little bit so I can pay to have somebody come in the house to help me with my husband, so I can pay for these extra services. So we were able to access into the financial advisor. She had legal documents in place, which was lucky, but not everybody does. So this guardianship paperwork, one of the things that Glenda and I were talking about earlier on before we got on this recording was that attorneys can actually prepare a one-page guardianship paperwork saying who you want to be in charge and who you don't want to be in charge. That sometimes is an easy step into that process, and knowing a good attorney to go to. There, we have wonderful elder care attorneys in our city: Charlie Weisinger, Carol Birch, Rosenblatt Law Firm, just to name a few, that can help you navigate that. But just knowing that if you don't have a relationship with the financial advisor and your spouse does, you need to make sure you're adamant about going to those meetings with them. And then on top of that, making sure one of your children knows who to go to. And if not a child, then you need to start backing into that relationship with, is it a bank that's going to have a trust set up? Who's going to be that person for you in the event something happens to you? Scenario 3, adult children live out of town. They take turns caring for mother. How do we begin the conversation about a care plan? And this is a really popular thing that happens with more and more children that have, gone out of state or gone out of city of San Antonio for college. They don't come back. And then their parents get older and the kids are now having to um, just organize from afar what to do with mom and dad and what the care plan is. So really making sure you have everything set up so that your children, as you age, know who's going to be taking care of what, who's going to be the power of attorney, who's going to be that medical power of attorney, who's in charge if something happens to you. And having that conversation about a care plan is important. Today, I'm actually going, after we record, to meet with a family where the daughter lives in Oregon. She is a social worker, and she hired us to go and read legal documents to her dad. He's still cognizant. He's in a private care home, and he wants to update a few things, and the attorneys have been talking to him, but he actually wants them read. And so I'm going to go and read the documents to him. And it sounds kind of crazy, but the daughter's like, you don't know how much that means to me, because my dad just doesn't want to sign documents. He's still cognizant, but I can't be there because I have to be at work. Scenario number 4, loved one has been in treatment for major diagnosis and medical trials. Physicians continue care, but loved one is becoming weaker. How do we speak up for the loved one to stop care? What does this look like? Palliative care, hospice, what's the difference? What questions do you ask? And how many providers do you interview? So I'll kind of work backwards on this. I always recommend anytime you're hiring anybody that's going to come into your home, whether it's an in-home care provider, a hospice company, a palliative care company, interview 3. Why? Because we just went through a pandemic. And if one organization, one company has a caregiver that doesn't show up for work, or they start giving bad care, you've already interviewed 3 and you have 2 to follow up behind them, that you can make that phone call and transition that care immediately. So always interviewing 3 is our recommendation. So what is the difference between palliative and hospice care? Palliative care is while you are still seeking treatment. If you're on dialysis, if you're on chemotherapy, if you're still seeking treatment, you can be on palliative care for symptom management, which is somebody coming in as part of a team to have eyeballs on you. Let's say you're in pain, but you can't get to the doctor because your doctor's office doesn't have an appointment for another couple of days. That palliative care team has direct access for somebody to call on your behalf to the doctor's office and say, you know what, these medications you're giving are not enough, or we need to transition them, or we need to get them in sooner. They're really great advocates for you, and they're really good at looking at that symptom management to make sure if there's wound care, if there's anything like that, that they can step in and help and be part of that team for you. Hospice care is when you know that you've done doing your chemotherapy, you're done with everything that you've been getting treatment for. When my mom decided to go off dialysis, she went on hospice, and she went into hospice in a nursing facility. She did not want to die at home. She knew I was kind of a little scared, a scaredy cat. So she was like, I don't want to do that to you. I don't want to put you in that position. So she ended up going to a facility. But hospice brought in a whole team. They brought in a chaplain, a social worker, a nurse. They had a medical director that was looking over her care and her end of life transition. And some people will say, as soon as I go on hospice, I'm going to die. Well, people will live up to 2 to 3 years on hospice. They have to get recertified every once in a while, but that hospice team is there to help you as a caregiver. So don't ever look at it like it's just end of life. That is a team for you to have that shower that you need, or you need to go run a quick errand. They're there to come in and help you with a medical assistant to bathe, to make sure things are going well with your loved one. It is a wonderful resource, and I know that people don't like to call it hospice, and when people hear hospice, they think really negatively about it. But I will tell you that hospice can be a really great support for you as a caregiver. On top of the nursing home, being able to go there are inpatient units, like I mentioned before, like Vitas. I believe there's a new one that's just came on board, and there's one that's on Blanco at Bitters here in San Antonio that's transitioning. But there are inpatient units where you can take your loved one if they're going to die within 7 to 10 days, and you can have a very peaceful experience. No beeps, no noises, no barking dogs. It's just you and your family being there and having that support for you. And then, of course, there's GIP, which is hospital, general inpatient hospice in a hospital. So when somebody is in the hospital and they're not stable enough to go home or to an inpatient unit, they can actually stay in the hospital and receive hospice care and end of life treatment. So going to our main conversation, the loved one's been in treatment, knowing when to have that conversation with somebody and saying, you know what, you're on trials. Let's put a time frame around this. Having those conversations and talking with that care team coordinator in the doctor's office to say, when do we stop? What does it look like? Because a lot of people wait till it's too late. And if it was like my dad, he was on a clinical trial, and then the doctor that was working with him needed him to do one more round of chemo to help him with his research. And my dad was like looking at me, and I said, nope, we're not going to do it. I knew when to stop. And because my dad and I had had the conversation about pain and end of life and when to stop, and knowing what my relationship was and what my responsibility was as a power of attorney for his medical care, we were able to make that decision together. However, not everybody's fortunate. So really paying attention to what the doctors are doing, what that continued care looks like, and is it for research or is it for going for the benefit of improving your loved one's life, or is it going to really matter that it's going to give them 6 more weeks, but they're going to be sick every day? So having those conversations are very important. So this is a fun thing I like to I wanted to share with you before I go into the second half and quickly kind of round out this webinar today. But here is a great resource for you called Artifacts. And Artifacts, I'll send it as a link, is a company that was bought or created up in Austin, Texas by two women that both had family members that had dementia. You can actually go in, get a membership. It's very reasonably priced, but you can start taking pictures of things and having stories being told around the pictures. So, for instance, if your loved one's been diagnosed with dementia and there's a tennis racket in the corner, I'll use this as an example because of one of my clients. The daughter asked the dad, well, what's that tennis racket for? I've never seen you play. And it's all kind of broken up. And he said, well, I used to chase your mom around the house with it.
Hmm.
And she said, oh my God, Dad, I want to take a picture of that. We're going to upload it to Artifacts. We're going to tag our brothers and sisters in it. And I want you to tell the story. And you can either do it audio, video, or you can just type up the story. So as your loved one becomes more and more subject to their dementia and their loss of memory, you can actually open this website and they can start looking at those pictures to be able to see the stories to remind them of what that artifact meant to them. Many people use this. I believe the Alzheimer's Association has really worked with the Artifacts people up in Austin to make this just people across the country need to know about it, because I think that even if you're going to lose a loved one and or you've had a loss, the stories just kind of go away with generations. So your grandchildren don't know the story of why that one thing is so important in the house or why the china is so important. You can actually start cataloging this through Artifacts, and I really think this is something that is just a way of being able to put the stories behind your stuff. And I always tell families when we're at workshops, go home, open your eyes, look around. Everything in your house has a memory and everything in your house has a story. So looking into Artifacts is really a great opportunity. Again, I can't even tell you, this has helped so many families that we've been working with just to capture those memories. So let's discuss how we can be intentional. And this is my favorite elephant, by the way. This is our elephant in the room. So let's talk a little bit about love. And I know this is taking a little bit of a turn, but just bear with me, because I believe that as caregivers, you have to remind yourself that love is a product of truthful communication. We sometimes get caught in the fact of just not reminding ourselves to love ourselves, because we get so caught up in caring for our loved ones and being a caregiver. So love is the willingness and ability to allow others the right to make their own choices for themselves without any insistence that they satisfy me. And loving myself is having the willingness and acquiring the ability to allow myself the right to make my own choices for myself without the need for the approval of others. And self-care while caring for a loved one is super important. Knowing when to take a break is so vital to your mental health and to your physical health. Having resources to turn to, WellMed being just an awesome opportunity to be able to provide those care groups and those resources for you to give you that break that you need. not being afraid to ask for help with your loved ones. And maybe it's not even your loved ones, maybe it's friends, maybe you're having to go outside of the family because the family is exhausted. Really building out that team for you to go to. And then understand you're grieving your loved one. When somebody gets sick, the minute that diagnosis happens, we all go into a tailspin of not knowing what's going to happen. We don't know what we don't know. So knowing that the grief starts immediately, and while for some of us it can take a long time, just knowing that you're grieving every day is okay to be sad. I always tell people, take 15 minutes for yourself, allow yourself to be sad because what is happening is sad. So grief is the normal and natural reaction to a loss of any kind. Grief is the conflicting feelings caused by the end of or change in a familiar pattern of behavior. Grief is a feeling of reaching out for someone who has always been there, only to discover when I need them one more time, they're no longer there. And grief is the feeling of reaching out for someone who was never there, only to discover when I needed them one more time, they're still not there for me. Many people get caught in grief and they don't know how to navigate it. We work with a wonderful grief recovery method counselors and social workers. Even if your person is not passed away, but they're losing their memories, that's a grief, and you should think about going to a grief group for that because active grief is important for you to be able to work through it and know that you're not alone in that process. So there is an emotional jail that we all live in, and it is your past is 10% fond memories and 90% regrets. And your future is 10% of planning and 90% of worry or fear. And we tend to get caught in this emotional jail of, one or the other, or if not both. So the responsibility is what has happened, but how you choose to respond to the event today. Otherwise, you remain a victim in emotional jail. So a lot of times people will say, Esther, I'm so worried about what's going to happen down the road, or I don't know what's going to go on. And I'm like, let's just be in the moment right now. Let's talk through what you're feeling. Let's talk through what you need. Let's talk through the support and the guidance that you're looking for and the feelings you're having inside so that you don't go past it too quick, not to remember that you can work through those things. You can work through the worry and the fear. So the present moment formula, acknowledge isn't completeness, approval is an inside job, and unresolved grief drains energy and limits choices, and active grief recovery is essential to moving forward. And I love this when people say, how are you doing? I'm fine. Well, fine is feelings inside, not expressed. So moving into the fall, and it says 2022, so you can tell how old this PowerPoint is, but moving into the fall of 2024, know when to say I'm not okay. Know when to ask for help. Have a team to turn to and get your affairs in order. It's more than about your loved one you're caring for. It's about you too. Reviewing your important documents, making sure you have a playbook in process for your family, your friends, your loved ones, so you don't get caught off guard or your family doesn't get caught off guard. So I'm going to take a few questions, but before I do that, I do want to promote and let y'all know that we do live workshops. We decided this year was going to be our workshop year, so we've been having them all over, and they're free for caregivers. All you have to do is go to our website at lossoflifeadvocates.com, look for workshops at the top, and then register for free. We will send out the flyer for this, but we are having our next event that is a live workshop. It is 5 hours, yes, because we bring all the professionals in one location to you. Lawyers, financial advisors, home care, hospice, palliative, doctors, nurses, you name it, Medicare people, Medicaid people, but we bring them all into one room. And in 5 hours, we walk through case studies and have them tell you what you need to do to be prepared. And they're there live and in person. I always tell people, when can you ever get a lawyer just to be somewhere for free? This is your chance. So if you're interested in joining us, we would love to have you come and be a part of this. It is July 13th, which is a Saturday. So going back to questions and comments, is there anything out there that we've talked about? I know there's a lot of heavy conversations that we've navigated through today, but I also know that I always tell people it's okay to not have questions and to not have comments because these are conversations that are hard and they're hard on the heart. So if you don't ask any questions, don't worry. You can always email into your WellMed team and let them, get in touch with me. You can certainly contact us if you need to have any more conversations or see how we work and how we can help you, or when our other workshops are located in and around San Antonio. So with that, this is my last slide, and this is me and my children. I always like to end with this because this was us after we decided to start Lola in 2017. And there was a photographer, and many of you in San Antonio might recognize this bridge, but it's downtown in King William. It's over Alamo Street. And the photographer said, I think this is the bridge over, Esther. You've gone through so much, losing your husband, losing your dad, and taking on this new adventure and this new journey to help families during really delicate moments in their lives. And so as my son and my daughter and I walked across the bridge, I want you to know that you're never alone. We're here to hold the flashlight for you, and to answer questions and to give you support and guidance. Thank you for allowing me to be a part of your conversation and your time today.
Thank you, Esther, so much for all this wonderful information. Patty had a really, and I think this is kind of what you are addressing with people. She said it's hard to plan if you don't know what the end of life will look like. Is it essential that you know that in order to plan?
I think so. I mean, I probably dwell on it a little bit too much because it's kind of what my day job is. But I think that trying to plan ahead of what you think you want things to look like is the best way for you to make a plan about how you want your kids to react,
Mhm.
how you actually um, how you accept death. And I think that's really hard conversation to have because we never want to think about leaving our loved ones behind. But if we don't give them a pathway to see that we're okay with it, that yeah, nobody wants to go, but when and if the time comes, this is the important things you need to know. And I think that my dad was such a good resource for me because we had had every conversation, and all he told me was, I don't want to be in any pain. And you'll know the moment when I can no longer speak. You'll be my voice. And so the power of attorney medically, I was able to make conversation, like make decisions for him with him during that process. But he would always say, you know what? I want you to talk to my daughter. I don't want to make the decision down to an aspirin. But I knew that when I looked in his eyes at the end of his life, and he couldn't make any more decisions, and the doctor was saying, he's still here. He can make the decision on chemo. I knew that we had talked about how he wanted his death to be, to know when to step in and say no.
Yeah.
This is not what he wanted. And so, yes, planning ahead is really important. And I will tell everybody when I do live workshops, I say, look, when I pass away, I want my celebration of life to be somewhere where everybody can come and have two or three of my favorite things, Prosecco and cupcakes. And so just planning that ahead of time puts it into the universe, right? So,
I've done the same thing, Esther. My daughter knows what my celebration should look like. It's going to be a lot of fun. I'm sorry I'm going to miss it. Uh, Patty followed up with another excellent question. She says, what are some good ways to get family or loved ones willing to discuss and plan? That's sometimes the hardest.
yes, I agree. And I always tell people, set a time, get a little time clock, or put your phone on a timer and say, we're only going to spend 30 minutes or 1 hour, and we're going to go over this. And once it's done, we'll walk away. And putting a time clock on it gives people the idea that we're going to sit here. It's going to be uncomfortable, but we have to do it. And I always tell family members when they're trying to get their adult children, and when we do our workshops, we always say, just invite your adult children to attend because they don't, a lot of times don't know where things are. But telling them, like, if I can't have this conversation with you and you don't want to hear it, I hope you're not going to be offended if I find somebody that's a third party that's going to make these decisions for me. So if you don't want to be a part of this, that's fine, but don't complain when and if the time comes that I've actually hired a bank to be a trust to manage things for me at the end of my life, or I've hired a friend, or I've asked a friend to do this for me. And I'm actually a power of attorney for a couple in San Antonio that, and they're lovely. They were married, they got divorced, they're best friends, they still live together. And I am their backup POA. So when either one of them, they don't have children. So either one of them go into the hospital, they call me, I show up, and I sit with the other person, and then they'll say, you know what, she's out of surgery, everything's good, you can go. So even for me, sometimes I'm stepping into some of those roles. And even when people have children that are adult children that can't be involved locally, just knowing to say to your children, look, if it's not you, there are a lot of people out there that are advocates and that can take your place if you truly do not want to do this. But 90% of the time I will say, you know what, can I talk to your daughter or your son and make sure they understand what this means? And usually after a conversation with me, or anybody on my team, they're able to say, you know what, you're right. I just don't want to talk about it. I don't want to think about my mom not being here, or my dad not being here, or, my dad's in the part of dementia where he's very aggressive and I don't want to be around it. I'm willing to give up that decision-making process. So having the conversation with them can be hard, but I always say the best thing to do is to set the timer and for me, open a bottle of wine, maybe have some snacks and say, I know this is going to be uncomfortable, but it's only going to be for an hour. So
Yeah.
starting with the time clock is always good.
Yeah, that's a good one. Um, Patty, you can also look on our YouTube or our website. And I know that we have had sessions exactly on that. How do you start the conversation? I like the time clock a lot, Esther, because
Mhm.
people then know it's not going to go on for hours and hours and hours, and they're going to be uncomfortable for hours. So I like that idea.
Yes, they are hard conversations. And but at the end of the day, the people that call us are either the adult children that are all of a sudden like, oh my gosh, I didn't have the conversation with my parents and now I'm stuck and I don't know how to move through this. Or it's, the ones that are saying, Esther, like we never, ever, every time we would bring up death and my parents would bring it up, we would just laugh it off. And now we're having to make these decisions and it's expensive because we
Yeah.
never had to talk about it. So the expenses, part of it, the financial burden that can happen to your children. And maybe that's the other way of telling them, look, if we don't have this conversation, the financial side of this can be expensive for you because I'm not going to be here. You're the one that's going to have to be holding the bag and shutting down bank accounts. There are a lot of banks that just don't let you walk in and get access to a bank account if you don't have things set up correctly.
True. Yeah, that's true. One of our friends, a longtime friend of mine, um, we were talking about hospice. You were talking about hospice, and her husband has been on hospice for 7 months in Austin, and he's still at home, and she's taking care of him with hospice care, and he's happy, and isn't that wonderful?
Mhm.
Um, and she's found a way. She comes to our sessions quite frequently to take care of herself too. And you talked about that also. You've got to take care of yourself as a caregiver, or you may be the one that goes first
Yeah,
before the person you're caring for.
that we get a lot of phone calls on that. And the hard ones are when, the healthy caregiver who's worn out and ends up passing before the loved one that they're caring for. And the children are trying to navigate finances to take care of dad or mom. Because they can't come and live with them. They've got small children. They're in the sandwich generation. So, those are really difficult scenarios having to guide a family through, their loved one can't sign documents, they've got that diagnosis. So if you wait too long, it can actually be, and you don't set it up correctly at the beginning, it can be so just detrimental to your family and all the way around.
Does anyone else have a question, comment, concern? The C's.
Like I said, not everybody is like, oh, I have tons of questions. I always tell people it's okay. It's a heavy subject. Um,
Exactly. And it's hard to process this information so rapidly. Don't you think that's true, Esther?
yes, absolutely,
Yeah.
absolutely. And a lot of people, I always tell people I am, I
Yeah.
went to a funeral home a couple years ago and went in to use the bathroom and the lights went out on me in the funeral home. And I thought, you know what? Nobody expects this to happen. Nobody wants to come to a funeral home. Nobody wants to be in the bathroom and the lights turn off on you. Nobody wants to talk about it. Nobody wants to be there. It is difficult. It is really hard to manage the conversations. And then even just think about having to be in a funeral home and having to navigate that is nobody just says, I'm going to go to a funeral home today.
For sure. Patty wants to know if you can put up that flyer for your
Sure. Let's
yeah,
see.
she'd like to see that again. And you see this little pop-up, it's the session survey. We're doing them now as we're in the session, and just go ahead and work on that as we're talking. Take you a couple of seconds to get this all done, only 8 questions there, and we would appreciate your feedback on the session today. Let's see. Joanne, she wanted to know, do you have a good checklist to use after death for a loved one to go by immediately? Like, this is where you need to go. This is what you need to do, first steps.
Yes, we do. We do have a checklist. I'm happy to share that with you. That we tell people, most importantly, right, pump the brakes. But here's where you can start and where to go to and where not to go to. So I'm happy to share that with you. And a lot of times our checklists start with when before somebody passes away and then goes all the way through afterwards. So I'm happy to share that with you. We
Okay.
actually have a checklist to go to the funeral home. Don't forget to take snacks. I always tell people pack a lunch No matter, I don't care what they say. Oh, this won't take that long. It takes a long time. So I always say, pack snacks, pack your favorite snacks, because they're going to offer you coffee and juice. But I think that part of their strategy is to get you hungry. So then you start making hangry decisions about paying for flowers or buying the chicken nuggets and French fries, or, they get you and you're like, okay. And all of a sudden you leave and you're like, I just signed a contract for things that shouldn't cost that much.
Yeah.
Um, so yes, that we do have a checklist on our website. If you go to our website under resources, we have a bunch of resources there. And we also work with two wonderful after loss companies. One is True State, and the other one is oh gosh, their name is going to connect. It starts with a C. But they actually all do after loss checklist with you. So if you wanted to go through, I think through Lola, we have a $75 like it's a contract fee where you can actually go in and say, I have a will or I don't have a will, and it's very interactive and it walks you through that. So there are two different companies that are out there that are, if you like doing things online and automated, that is a good process. We still work very just person to person. I like to tell people when they say all these companies are coming out with, AI, and I'm like, you can't answer a question. You need that person to be with you, to walk you through, because it's like a plane when you're going through a transition. No two wheels at the airport from the planes land in the same spot. Everybody is dealing with something at different places and need different things at different times. So yes. And I'm
I
going to
had
look.
to start laughing about the snack because I was reliving when I went to the funeral home for my parents and my husband. It was an all-day event.
Oh,
It's like
yes,
buying a car. There you go.
yes,
Same
yes.
type of experience.
Yes, and the other name of the company is called Cadence, Cadence, and they are the one that's $75. True State, actually, just to kind of give you all a little nugget, they have a process where once you get the letter of testamentary and the death certificate, you can upload that and it will give every account known to a loved one, from down to their PayPal account.
Wow.
A lot of times people are like, how many accounts does my dad have? So a lot of times I'll tell people, if you don't know and there's not a will, it makes it a little harder. But if you don't know before somebody passes away, run that credit report. That'll give you a great way of just kind of giving a snapshot of what's out there. But True State has a bundled package where you can actually run that report, and it's given that, if you have the will and you've gone through probate, you get that letter of testamentary and the death certificate, you upload it, and every known address to the person will come up, every bank account, every credit card, anything that's ever been listed attached to you financially. So that's something that both of those are after loss resources as well.
Esther, this has been a wonderful session today, just jam-packed full of information. There's people that have been thanking you for your
Mhm.
practical suggestions and for the information that you have shared today, and I'm amongst those.
Thank
Um, yeah, and so I want to thank all of you for what you're doing, for the caregiving role that you are participating in, the resilience that you have. And it's people like Esther and other presenters that we have on our sessions that can help you through your caregiving journey. So I invite you to come back soon. Go look at our podcast. I've been doing this 14 years. And I think maybe we've had podcasts for the past 8 or so. Anyway, there's a lot of information and resources that are available for you. Take a look at Esther's website. I'm sure there's a lot of resources there. I'm going to go there myself and check it out.
you.
So
Thank you.
Esther, thank you so much for being with us today. Any final comments for our participants?
Oh, just that you're all my heroes, and having from one caregiver to another. Thank you. When people say, Esther, when do you become a caregiver? The minute you're caring for anybody in your life, you're a caregiver. But those of you that are at the end of life with your loved ones, my hat's off to you. We are here to support and guide you if you need help, just access to resources. But you truly are my heroes because I know how hard it is. So please give yourself a pat on the back, give yourself grace, and if you ever need anything, please feel free to reach out to us.
Thank you, Esther, and thank you, everyone. I hope to see you on future sessions. Bye-bye.